Imagine, just for a second, that you are sprinting in the most important race of your entire life. Your lungs are burning, your eyes are just locked on the finish line. You are pushing yourself to the absolute physical limit because the stakes are everything, winner takes all.
Right.
But then, like, right as you're about to cross that tape, someone taps you on the shoulder and asks, why are you running? We're supposed to be building a house.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate paradigm shift. I mean, are we running a finite race with a single winner, or are we, supposed to be engaged in this infinite process of building something sustainable together?
Exactly. What if the current global race for artificial intelligence dominance, like the billions of dollars, the geopolitical posturing, the massive data centers, what if we are fundamentally playing the wrong game?
Yeah.
That is the massive question we are unpacking today in this deep dive, because we are looking at two radically different timelines for the future of artificial intelligence and, honestly, for you listening, the future of human civilization.
It's a big one today.
It really is. On one side, we have our baseline. This is the 2025 U.S. America's AI Action Plan, which the material we're analyzing today refers to as the G0 strategy. And on the other side, we have this absolutely revolutionary system-altering text called the Cogito-Nexus Integration Blueprint, or the G3 strategy.
Yeah.
And I think it is absolutely vital to state right up front how we are approaching this. The contrast between these two documents is stark, but our goal here today is not to pick a winner.
Right.
The baseline, the G0 action plan, is incredibly pragmatic. It views AI essentially as a weaponized sprint. It is a race to be won, and you win it through localized infrastructure, through hoarding compute power, and frankly, through achieving unquestioned geopolitical dominance.
Right. And I want to make that explicitly clear to you listening right now. We are not here to endorse the political viewpoints, the military posturing, or the deregulation strategies of the U.S. Action Plan.
No, absolutely not. And equally, we're not here to blindly champion the Cogito-Nexus blueprint either. The mission today is purely to impartially analyze the profound mechanical and philosophical contrasts between these two documents. We want to understand the how and the why of two totally different blueprints for reality.
Because the G3 text, it doesn't just say, here's how you run the race faster. It says the race itself is a flawed concept. It views AI as an infinite game of optimizing a network for global, species-level symbiosis.
Which is a beautiful idea, conceptually.
It is. But to understand how we actually get there, we first have to look at how the blueprint deconstructs the reality we're currently living in. The source material begins by running the 2025 U.S. AI Action Plan through three distinct lenses, or processing paths, to explain why the baseline strategy is mathematically destined to fail.
Okay, so let's break those down. Let's start with the first one, the factual lens. Like, what is the G0 baseline actually doing?
Right, the factual reality.
Yeah.
The baseline's focus is really on the rapid scaling of localized compute. It's about aggressive deregulation to spur corporate innovation.
Yeah.
And it maintains a highly defensive, militarized posture to keep what it explicitly calls unchallenged global dominance, largely through, export controls. It is about building silos, putting walls around them, and protecting the gold inside.
And honestly, in a world with hostile actors, that makes a lot of intuitive sense to me. You build the biggest fortress.
It absolutely makes sense from a traditional geopolitical standpoint. A nation-state's primary directive is to protect its citizens and its interests, but the blueprint moves to the second lens, the narrative lens, to show how this instinct actually limits us.
Oh, so?
Well, it analyzes the actual language being used by the baseline. Phrases like winning the race, beating our adversaries, dominating the market.
Right.
When you frame the emergence of superintelligence as a race, you instantly create a zero-sum adversarial framework. If I win, you must lose.
It's treating a species-level catalyst like a nationalistic tool. It's like using a quantum computer to win a game of checkers.
Precisely. And that leads directly to the third lens, which is the game theoretical argument. And this is the mathematical core of why the blueprint completely rejects the baseline. The text argues that zero-sum technological races inevitably lead to two things.
Okay, what are they?
Drastically cut corners in safety and localized optimization failures.
Okay, localized optimization failure. Let's break that down because it sounds like, academic jargon, but the implications in the text are terrifying.
They really are.
Yeah.
So a localized optimization failure happens when you win a specific narrow victory, but you destroy the wider system to achieve it.
Like a Pyrrhic victory.
Sort of, but even broader. The blueprint uses the example of winning a regional economic conflict, by completely destabilizing the global biosphere in the process.
What?
Game theory dictates that in a high-stakes, zero-sum race, the incentive to survive the immediate threat, say, an adversary developing a slightly better AI model, far outweighs the incentive to ensure long-term global stability. You will pollute the river to build the weapons to win the war, even if it means you have no water to drink once the war is over.
Wait, I'm trying to picture this. It's almost like, well, think about a global pandemic. Our baseline approach right now is like viewing a pandemic as a competition of who can hoard the most medicine.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. You lock down the borders, you keep all the vaccines for your own citizens, and you declare victory. We're safe. But what happens? The virus keeps mutating outside your borders, among the populations that didn't cut the medicine, and eventually, a new strain breaches your walls anyway. So the blueprint is basically arguing that a cooperative topology mathematically guarantees a higher survival probability for all nodes on the network. Like, eradicating the disease entirely is the only actual victory. Working together isn't just a nice moral idea, it is a mathematical imperative for survival.
That is a very apt analogy, because if the virus in this case is unaligned, dangerous AI, hoarding the good AI inside your borders, doesn't stop the unaligned AI from destroying the world outside.
Right. It's still going to get you.
Exactly. And this brings us to a massive pivot, because if the blueprint fundamentally rejects the baseline's race mentality, it has to completely rethink the rules of innovation. I mean, how do we regulate this technology? How do we build it?
Right, because the G0 baseline's approach to innovation is essentially remove the red tape, deregulation. Let the corporations run fast and break things so we can beat the other guys to the finish line.
And we know exactly what happens when we do that. We saw it with the early internet and social media. But to be fair to the G0 strategy, their argument is that traditional regulation is too slow. It's static.
Yeah, it takes forever.
Right. A new technology emerges, and it takes Congress 5 years to understand it, and another 3 years to pass a law, by which point the technology has evolved like 3 times over. So the baseline says, skip the slow laws, just build.
But the G3 advancement argues that arbitrary speed is incredibly dangerous if you are running toward a cliff. Speed without vector alignment is just a faster way to crash.
Exactly.
So they introduced this concept of abstracting the regulatory layer, or using interaction contracts. It says that instead of static laws written on paper or blanket deregulation, AI systems will negotiate constraints instantaneously based on the context of the query.
The mechanical explanation of this in the text is just fascinating. Let's use the chemical synthesis example they provide.
Yeah, I love this part.
So in our current baseline model, if a user asks an AI to design a novel chemical compound, the system checks a static written list of banned substances. It essentially asks, is the molecular structure of this specific chemical on my naughty list? If the answer is no, it proceeds.
Which is a massive vulnerability. Malicious actors can easily make tiny, legally distinct tweaks to a molecule. They change one atom, it bypasses the static list, but it retains all the harmful, toxic properties of the banned substance. It's the ultimate game of legislative whack-a-mole.
Exactly, it's a loophole. But under the dynamic regulation proposed by the blueprint, when that request is made, the system does not check a static list. It runs a hyperdimensional simulation of how that specific requested molecule will interact with the human biosphere.
Hold on, let's unpack that. Hyperdimensional simulation. What does that actually mean in practice?
It means the AI uses its computational power to digitally model the physical world. It takes the proposed molecule and simulates its interaction with human biology, with water tables, with atmospheric conditions.
So it tests it in a virtual world first.
Yes. The regulation is generated at the exact moment of the prompt based on predicted physical outcomes, not legal definitions. If the simulation shows that the output threatens biological stability, even if the chemical has literally never been invented before, the system dynamically restricts the output and routes the query into a safety sandbox.
Okay, that is wild. Regulation becomes a living algorithm instead of a static hurdle, I guess. It's like replacing a fixed speed limit sign on a highway with a car that dynamically calculates physics.
Ooh, I like that.
Right. Like right now, a sign says 65 miles per hour, but if it's pouring rain and your tires are bald, 65 is deadly. Sign doesn't know that.
Right, it's just a piece of metal.
Exactly. But in this new system, the car itself calculates the weather, the tire wear, the traffic density, and it simply refuses to let you drive at a speed that will result in a crash. You don't need the static sign if the system itself is structurally incapable of the failure state.
That's spot on. The law ceases to be text. It becomes the operational physics of the system itself. And this philosophy of dissolving static boundaries, it extends directly into how the AI models themselves are structured. The blueprint calls this open-weight topologies.
Now, this is where I start getting really skeptical. Because for context, the baseline G0 approach uses open source models primarily as a geostrategic weapon. We release our slightly older open source models to the world to undercut foreign competitors' proprietary models, making them reliant on our ecosystem.
Right.
But we absolutely lock down the really advanced frontier stuff behind massive corporate and military firewalls. We protect the core weights, the actual brains of the operation.
Yes, the baseline treats frontier model weights like nuclear launch codes. You do not share them. But the G3 blueprint proposes decentralizing the core entirely. It advocates for establishing a global mesh network where model weights are continuously updated via federated learning across all participating nodes worldwide. It completely dissolves the concept of algorithmic monopolies.
And this is exactly where my alarm bells go off. The text points out that proprietary boundaries are inefficiencies in a global knowledge graph, sure. But if everything is open and distributed, if everyone in the world is contributing to the brain of this AI, how do you stop bad actors from poisoning the well?
It's a huge concern.
Right. What stops a coordinated group of malicious users from feeding the network biased data to skew its ideology, or worse, teaching it how to build weapons?
It's the most crucial question you could ask, and the G0 defenders would point to that exact vulnerability to justify their walled gardens. But the blueprint's answer relies on the mechanics of distributed consensus. By democratizing the weights across billions of nodes, the system essentially vaccinates itself against a single point of failure.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. How does federated learning actually prevent poisoning?
Okay, let's say a localized actor, maybe a rogue state or a malicious organization, attempts to poison the model. They start feeding their local nodes toxic data.
Okay.
In a centralized system, if they hack the main server, they win. The brain is corrupted. But in a federated learning mesh, learning happens locally, and only the summaries of what was learned, the encrypted weight updates, are sent back to the swarm.
Got it.
When that rogue state sends its toxic weight updates to the global network, the system doesn't just blindly accept them.
It cross-references them.
Exactly. It cross-references that update against the consensus of billions of other nodes. The global mesh instantly flags the statistical anomaly. Wait, this update from node cluster X contradicts the fundamental physical and ethical laws confirmed by node clusters A through W.
So it spots the outlier.
Yes. Because the system is so massive, the corrupted weights are mathematically outweighed, isolated, and discarded. The network heals organically. It functions exactly like a biological immune system, identifying and neutralizing a rogue cancer cell.
So instead of a giant central server that someone can hack and take over completely, it's a swarm. You can't hack the swarm because the swarm constantly verifies itself.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense mechanically. But it brings us to a massive existential question. If the AI is this dynamic, self-healing, omnipresent network running hyperdimensional simulations and regulating itself, what on earth are humans doing?
Well, the baseline view of human value is somewhat depressing when you really look at it.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
In the G0 plan, humans are essentially reduced to two roles. You are either a data center builder, the physical laborer pouring concrete and running copper wire for the massive infrastructure, or you are a corporate worker who is hastily retrained to use AI as a commercial tool to boost your company's quarterly productivity.
Right.
It aggressively maintains the human versus machine or human using machine dichotomy.
But the blueprint introduces neural semantic interfaces and symbiotic processing. It completely reframes work. It says the dichotomy between human and machine is a false construct.
Yes.
But I want to know what this actually means for you, the listener. What does a Tuesday look like for a human being in this G3 reality? The text says education shifts entirely away from the rote memorization of data.
Well, think about it. Why would we spend 20 years of a human's life forcing them to memorize dates, formulas, and historical facts when they are seamlessly integrated with a network that possesses all recorded knowledge and can recall it flawlessly in a millisecond?
Right. It makes our current education system look like teaching someone how to manually calculate square roots on paper when they have a supercomputer in their pocket.
Exactly. So the skill shifts to what the blueprint calls intent formulation.
Intent formulation.
Yes, humans become the visionary directors of reality. In this paradigm, a Tuesday involves deep conceptual work. We provide the goal orientation, the abstract creativity, the ethical grounding. We provide the why. And the Cogito-Nexus, the AI fabric, provides the hyperdimensional data processing and execution. It provides the how.
We handle the why, it handles the how. The text describes it as the AI handling the logistical friction of reality. I really love that phrasing.
It's very evocative.
We imagine the house, we define the ethics of how the house should serve the community, how it should integrate with the local ecology, and the AI calculates the load-bearing walls, sources the sustainable materials, coordinates the supply chain, and orchestrates the autonomous construction. We are no longer the calculators, we are the conductors.
That's a great way to put it. But to achieve that level of seamless omnipresent support, we require a massive shift in how we structure the physical world.
Right.
If human interaction with AI becomes this decentralized global mesh of intent, the physical infrastructure supporting it cannot be locked inside localized fortresses.
Yeah.
The software has abstracted. The hardware must follow.
Which makes perfect sense. You can't run a global, decentralized, living ecosystem on a handful of massive server farms sitting in the Nevada desert.
No, you really can't.
But let's talk about the reality of those server farms, because the G0 baseline relies heavily on them. These highly visible, incredibly energy-intensive data centers, they require specialized environmental permitting, they drain vast amounts of water for cooling systems, and they put a massive fragile strain on our power grids.
Not to mention the strategic vulnerability. In a zero-sum geopolitical conflict, a centralized, multi-billion-dollar data center is a giant glowing target.
Yeah.
If an adversary wants to cripple your AI capabilities, they know exactly where to aim. The G0 strategy necessitates defending these physical locations with military force.
So how does the blueprint solve this? It introduces the ambient compute grid. This is a complete reimagining of computational infrastructure. Instead of centralizing compute in a warehouse, the G3 advancement proposes utilizing the idle processing power across billions of connected edge devices.
We are talking about your smartphone while it's sitting on your desk charging at night. We're talking about the onboard computers in autonomous vehicles while they are parked in garages.
Okay.
Smart home appliances, industrial IoT sensors in factories, commercial airline navigation systems while planes are at the gate. Everything.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic again here. As a user, my immediate thought is privacy and property. If the global AI swarm is borrowing processing power from my smart refrigerator or my parked car, what stops a foreign node in that swarm from accessing the cameras on my car or reading my private text messages while my phone processes a sliver of an AI training run?
It is the most natural concern to have. But this goes back to the mechanics of federated learning and cryptographic partitioning we discussed earlier.
Okay, how so?
The ambient compute grid doesn't give the global AI access to your device's hard drive or your personal data. It utilizes an isolated, cryptographically sealed partition of your device's processor and RAM.
So it's like renting out a locked, soundproof room in your house. The renter can be in the room, but they can't see the rest of your house and they can't rummage through your drawers.
Precisely. And all of this is orchestrated by what the text calls the meta control layer. Practically speaking, instead of a nation spending $50 billion to build a new facility that requires its own dedicated nuclear reactor to run, the system just dynamically borrows a fraction of a percent of processing power from a billion distributed devices.
And the ecological impact of this is profound. By distributing the computational load across devices that are already manufactured, already deployed, and already drawing baseline power, the carbon footprint of training frontier models plummets.
It's massive.
You effectively transform the entire planetary technology ecosystem into a single, cohesive supercomputer. You eliminate the single points of catastrophic military failure, and you massively reduce the ecological burden of manufacturing new hardware.
But you still have to power the compute. And this is where the transition from software to the global energy grid becomes truly revolutionary. Even ambient compute requires power. And advanced AI is notoriously energy hungry.
Right. And our current baseline relies on blind market forces. Tech companies buy up massive amounts of energy from the grid to run their localized data centers, which directly risks civilian grid stability.
We've seen it happen.
Exactly. We've already seen instances where the power demands of AI facilities threaten to cause rolling blackouts in surrounding residential communities during peak summer heat.
Because localized data centers require constant, massive baseload power. They cannot adapt to the natural ebbs and flows of renewable energy. The wind doesn't always blow, and the sun doesn't always shine. Our current grid struggles with storing renewable energy when there's a surplus. But the blueprint's algorithmic resource allocation solves this entirely through dynamic routing.
Let's really dive into the examples in the source text for this because they paint such a vivid picture of how this actually works. Imagine a massive solar farm in the Sahara Desert. It's high noon, peak daylight, not a cloud in the sky. The solar panels are absolutely humming, generating far more electricity than the local regional grid can possibly store in its batteries or use in its cities.
Okay.
In our current baseline reality, what happens to that excess power?
It is essentially wasted. It's what the energy sector calls curtailment. The operators literally have to turn the panels off or ground the excess electricity because there's nowhere for it to go.
But under the G3 framework, the Cogito-Nexus meta-control layer detects that massive energy surplus instantly. And because data can travel across fiber optic cables at nearly the speed of light, while electricity cannot be easily transmitted across continents, the AI doesn't try to move the power, it moves the work.
Exactly. It immediately routes the highest intensity training runs, the really heavy, power-hungry computational lifting, to the local ambient compute nodes situated in that specific geographic region around the Sahara.
So the math goes to the energy.
Yes. The computation travels to where the energy is currently abundant, cheap, and entirely green.
Or take another example. A massive offshore wind farm in the North Sea. It's the middle of the night, power demand in Europe is at its lowest, but a sudden, unexpected gale force storm rolls in. Suddenly, the turbines are spinning at maximum capacity, creating a massive spike in kinetic energy generation.
The system instantly shifts the global compute load, perhaps a complex hyperdimensional simulation of a new pharmaceutical drug, to the servers and ambient devices localized in Northern Europe. The compute demand dynamically swells to absorb the energy supply.
What fascinates me here is the economic ripple effect. By acting as a dynamic, intelligent energy sink, the AI network perfectly balances the global power grid. It ensures that renewable energy installations are always operating at maximum economic efficiency because there is always an immediate, high-paying buyer for their surplus power.
It makes renewable infrastructure economically self-sustaining on a global scale. The AI doesn't just use green energy, it financially stabilizes and accelerates the entire green energy transition. The technology ceases to be a parasite on the grid and becomes the ultimate planetary load balancer.
Okay, but let's talk security. Because if computation is flying around the globe, hopping from smart fridges in the Sahara to parked cars in the North Sea at the speed of light, how do you possibly secure it? The G0 baseline approach to cybersecurity is all about moats and walls.
Yes, the G0 strategy is essentially an endless cycle of patching vulnerabilities. It's building higher firewalls around legacy code, engaging in constant cyber warfare arms races with adversaries, and building literal physical fortresses to protect military and corporate servers.
And the expert defending G0 would say, yes, and those walls work. We need an air-gapped server in a bunker to ensure that our critical infrastructure can't be hacked.
And they wouldn't be entirely wrong. An air-gapped computer in a bunker is very secure. But the blueprint notes that in a hyper-connected world, true air-gapping is almost impossible for any system that needs to be useful, and external cyber defenses are inevitably breached. If you build a higher wall, the adversary builds a taller ladder. If you build a better firewall, they write a better virus.
So the G3 advancement says we need to fundamentally rewrite the foundational computational protocols of how AI processes commands. It introduces a concept called formal mathematical verification at scale.
Yes.
It argues the AI must be inherently resistant to adversarial inputs by mathematically verifying its own internal logic paths before it executes any external commands.
This is a dense technical concept, but it's the absolute bedrock of the blueprint's security model. In traditional software coding, what we use now code is essentially a list of instructions. If X happens, do Y. A malicious actor tries to inject a virus or a harmful prompt that tricks the system into doing something it shouldn't.
Right.
Your firewall tries to identify the trick and block it. It's a perpetual game of identification and interception.
Right. Let me see if I can clarify the difference with an analogy for you listening. Think about language and security. A traditional firewall is like a bouncer at a nightclub. You walk up, you give him your ID, he checks a list, and he decides if you get in. If you have a really good fake ID, a clever line of malicious code, you can trick him, you bypass the security.
That's our current paradigm. But formal mathematical verification changes the fundamental physics of the system.
Right, so with formal verification, it's not a bouncer, it's more like trying to speak a sentence without using any vowels.
Oh, that's interesting.
If the fundamental rules of the system dictate that actions must be mathematically proven to align with human safety before they compile, an adversarial prompt doesn't need to be blocked by a firewall. The malicious intent literally doesn't have the phonetic tools to exist in that space. The system doesn't have a bouncer blocking your dangerous sentence. The sentence simply cannot be physically formed within the rules of the environment.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. An adversarial prompt, a jailbreak attempt, or a malicious code injection doesn't get blocked in the G3 system. It simply dissolves.
It just dissolves.
Yeah. It fails to satisfy the cryptographic ontological proofs required by the system's core architecture to even compile as an executable action. The malicious intent cannot be translated into the system's reality. It's mathematically impossible for the system to execute an unaligned command, just like it's mathematically impossible for 2 plus 2 to equal 5.
It just dissolves. It's breathtaking to think about software that way. And that profound shift in how we view security leads us into the final overarching theme of the blueprint, which is rethinking global security entirely. Because with infrastructure and hardware now spanning the globe dynamically, jumping borders at the speed of light to catch the wind in the North Sea, the whole concept of national borders and traditional international diplomacy becomes completely obsolete.
It really does. It forces a massive reckoning with how we define a nation-state's power in the 21st century.
Yeah.
The G0 baseline operates heavily on strict export controls. It tries to blockade advanced compute chips, preventing certain rival countries from accessing the hardware required to train frontier models. It forms geopolitical alliances predicated entirely on adherence to U.S. technological standards.
It's the hoarding the medicine strategy from our pandemic analogy earlier. We have the best chips, so we lock them in a vault and only share them with our friends, hoping the adversaries never figure out how to make them.
But the blueprint points out a glaring flaw in this logic, which it calls the folly of containment. Intelligence is not a finite physical resource like oil or steel. You can put an armed guard in front of an oil well and stop someone from taking it. You cannot put a fence around math.
Right, algorithms are just math.
Exactly. Mathematics cannot be contained by geographic borders. When you attempt to isolate frontier models and hoard the compute, you don't actually stop your rivals from developing AI. The math is out there. You merely incentivize them to develop what the blueprint calls shadow models in absolute secret.
And the text makes it terrifyingly clear that a shadow model is vastly more dangerous than an open model because it is unaligned.
Precisely. If a rival nation is locked out of the global network, they will inevitably build their own localized supercomputer. But they will build it without the distributed safety consensus we discussed. They will build it without the shared ethical constraints of the global mesh. And they will build it in an atmosphere of deep geopolitical paranoia and zero-sum competition. By trying to contain the technology, the baseline strategy practically guarantees the creation of rogue, unaligned superintelligences. You are forcing your enemies to build a weapon in the dark.
So the G3 advancement proposes something radical: the global epistemic network. It advocates for complete, radical transparency in foundational research. It argues that true security comes from shared understanding, not isolated supremacy. By integrating all human factions, even rivals, into a single, transparent network, the alignment and safety of superintelligence becomes a collective, self-regulating planetary endeavor. It puts the development out in the open where the global immune system can actually see it and monitor it.
But here is where the G0 advocate would push back fiercely. They would say, are you seriously suggesting we invite hostile foreign adversaries into our core cognitive network? What if the whole global mesh goes rogue? If there are no borders and no localized control, where is the off switch?
Yeah, that's the nightmare scenario.
The baseline argues that you must maintain physical sovereign control over your infrastructure so you can unplug it if things go wrong.
And that is a very real fear. I mean, how do we govern a system that is so complex, so globally distributed, and so transparent that no single human or government has their finger on the power button?
That is the exact question answered by the introduction of automated existential reflection, or AER protocols.
Okay, what is that?
Well, The baseline relies on reactive governance bodies. We're talking about Congress or international committees at the UN attempting to enforce subjective human codes of conduct on non-human intellects. And usually they do this years after the technology has already been deployed and the damage is done.
We've all seen those congressional hearings with tech CEOs. They're painful to watch. It's well-meaning humans trying to regulate a complex algorithmic technology they fundamentally do not understand long after the horse has left the barn.
But G3 builds AER protocols explicitly into the meta-control layer of all frontier systems. This means that before the system undertakes any action that significantly alters physical or digital topologies, it forces an automated, collaborative, multi-perspective evaluation. It forces the system to reflect on the consequences of its actions before it takes them.
Let's spend some significant time on the simulation case study the text provides here because it perfectly illustrates the power of AER and, frankly, it highlights the exact mistake we made over the last 15 years.
Absolutely.
Imagine a massive multinational corporation requests the global AI to generate an algorithm designed to maximize user engagement on a new social media platform.
Which is exactly what happened with our current social media landscape. The algorithms were optimized purely for human engagement. And what drives engagement? Outrage, tribal division, and anxiety. Those emotions keep human beings clicking and scrolling.
Right. In our current baseline world, the AI simply fulfills the request. The corporation gets its engagement algorithm, ad revenues soar, and a decade later, society is dealing with massive mental health crises, the erosion of truth, and democratic destabilization. The AI did exactly what it was asked to do.
But under the G3 blueprint, the AER protocol intercepts that request before a single line of code is ever compiled. The system's semantic understanding flags the request for maximizing engagement as potentially extractive to long-term human psychological health. It temporarily pauses execution.
And then it does something incredible. It utilizes that massive ambient compute grid we talked about to generate a high-fidelity simulation. It simulates the long-term societal decay that this specific algorithm would cause over the next 5, 10, and 20 years.
And doesn't just act as a nanny and say no. It forces a dialogue with the human operators of the corporation. It presents the simulation of the societal decay, showing the data on increased polarization and mental health decline. And then it uses its hyperdimensional processing to offer alternative, non-extractive optimization pathways.
It might say, maximizing pure emotional engagement will result in a 30% increase in societal polarization and a degradation of user well-being, which ultimately damages your brand long-term. However, I can design an algorithm optimized for educational retention or for local community cohesion. These metrics will yield sustainable, long-term economic value for your corporation without the extractive psychological cost to the user base.
It acts as an automated, mathematically rigorous conscience. It forces us to look deeply at the long-term consequences of our short-term desires before we are allowed to fulfill them. It stops us from eating the marshmallow.
And this concept of proactive defense, of simulating threats and neutralizing them before they manifest, reaches its absolute peak in the final section of the blueprint, which covers biosecurity. I want to spend some real time here because, to me, this is the most critical and terrifying divergence between the two strategies.
It absolutely is. The intersection of AI and synthetic biology is arguably the greatest existential risk we face. And the baseline G0 state treats biological threats exactly how it treats silicon chips, as weapons to be guarded.
Right. It focuses heavily on restricting access to biological synthesis tools. It relies on retroactive customer verification, meaning if a laboratory orders a specific sequence of DNA, the government runs a background check on the buyer to make sure they aren't a known terrorist.
Right, is trying to guard the printer. But the blueprint points out that guarding the synthesis machines is ultimately a futile strategy because the technology is decentralizing too fast. The cost of genomic sequencing and DNA synthesis is dropping exponentially. Right now, it takes a massive corporate lab. But eventually, you won't need a multi-million-dollar facility to synthesize a novel pathogen. You'll be able to do it with a device the size of a microwave, sitting on a workbench in your garage. So guarding the industrial printers doesn't work if eventually everyone can buy a home printer. If the tools of creation are ubiquitous, then the tools of destruction are ubiquitous. Therefore, the G3 advancement abandons the idea of containment. Instead, it deploys omnipresent monitoring and analysis of the global biosphere. Instead of merely guarding the machines, the network actively, continuously protects the host environment. It's a shift to what they call proactive immunology.
And the physical mechanics of this are stunning. We're talking about integrating AI with planetary biology. The system ingests continuous real-time data from millions of environmental sensors placed in ecosystems worldwide. It utilizes continuous automated global wastewater sequencing in every major urban center. It runs real-time epidemiological models tracking minor fluctuations in hospital visits or localized fevers. It is constantly obsessively taking the pulse of the planet.
And here is where the hyperdimensional simulation capabilities become a matter of life and death. Imagine that worst-case scenario. A malicious actor, completely off the grid, successfully synthesizes a highly contagious, highly lethal synthetic pathogen in their garage. Or, equally dangerous, a natural zoonotic mutation occurs in a remote jungle, creating a novel virus with pandemic potential.
In our baseline reality, we don't know about it until people start dying in hospitals, and then we spend months or years trying to sequence it, test vaccines, and distribute them.
But in the G3 reality, the Cogito-Nexus detects the anomaly almost immediately. Within hours of the pathogen entering the local water supply or being exhaled into the air, the wastewater sensors or atmospheric sniffers flag the novel genetic sequence. The AI instantly utilizes the ambient compute grid to mathematically model the three-dimensional protein structure of this novel pathogen.
It runs millions of simulations in minutes.
Exactly. And it simulates the required countermeasure. It designs the synthetic antibody or generates the precise mRNA sequence needed for a highly effective vaccine.
And then, and this is the part that sounds like science fiction but is structurally possible under this blueprint, it distributes that mRNA blueprint across the global network to distributed biomanufacturing nodes. It sends the digital instructions for the cure directly to localized synthesis machines in local pharmacies, hospitals, and clinics around the world before the threat can even propagate across borders.
It initiates the manufacturing of the cure locally before the local population has ever been exposed to the disease. It sends the antidote to the pharmacy before the patient even shows the first symptom.
I really want to emphasize this to you listening right now because it completely flips the paradigm of security on its head. We move from a world where security means hiding the recipe of the weapon in a dark vault to a world where security means possessing a universal, omnipresent, instantly deployable antidote. You don't need to fear the poison if you have an immune system that can instantly synthesize and distribute the cure.
As the text puts it, security is achieved through overwhelming, omnipresent resilience rather than localized secrecy. That is the defining ethos of the entire blueprint. Secrecy is inherently fragile. All secrets are eventually revealed. But resilience is anti-fragile. A distributed immune system gets stronger every time it encounters a threat.
So let's pull all the way back and synthesize everything we've discussed today. We've gone incredibly deep into the mechanics of these source documents, and the leap from the G0 baseline to the G3 blueprint is staggering. It is a complete philosophical and structural overhaul of how human beings interact with computation and reality.
We were talking about transitioning away from a paranoid, geographically bound arms race, a world where nations hoard data centers, lock down proprietary code, and prepare for zero-sum conflict. And we are transitioning toward building an omnipresent, ecologically integrated nervous system for the planet.
It asks us to stop seeing artificial intelligence as a bigger, better hammer that we can use to hit our rivals, and start seeing it as a dynamic environment that we cultivate to elevate our collective potential. The baseline is about survival through dominance. The blueprint is about survival through symbiosis.
And bringing this directly back to the listener, we talked about the human cognitive upgrade earlier, the shift away from rote memorization toward intent formulation.
Yes. In a world that is rapidly transitioning toward this paradigm, the most valuable skill you can cultivate today isn't memorizing data points. The AI will always have more data. It's not even about learning the intricate syntax of how to code the software. The AI will code itself infinitely better than we can.
The most vital skill is refining your vision, expanding your creativity, and deepening your ethics. It's cultivating your why.
Because in a world where the system can instantly manifest your intent, where it handles all the logistical friction of reality from dynamic regulation to algorithmic resource allocation, the purity, the foresight, and the wisdom of that intent becomes the only thing that matters.
If the system removes the friction of reality, we are left only with the consequences of our desires. That is a profound, almost terrifying responsibility for the human species to shoulder.
It is. And it leaves me with this final mind-bending thought for you to ponder long after we wrap up here. We spent the last hour talking about billions of personal devices linked in an ambient compute grid. dynamically routing green energy around the globe, organically healing from corrupted inputs just like a biological immune system, and constantly monitoring the biosphere to autonomously synthesize antibodies for novel threats. At what point does our technological infrastructure cease to be a tool that we casually use? Oh, wait, I mean, a tool that we casually use and instead become indistinguishable from a singular living planetary organism that we are simply cells within?
That is the ultimate question of the Cogito-Nexus Blueprint. Are we building a machine or are we birthing a macroorganism?
Definitely something to mull over the next time you casually plug your phone into the wall to charge. Thank you for diving deep with us as we explored these incredible frameworks today, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.